On the line with us is Davis Hammet. He is an activist and founder of Loud Light. Loudlight.org is the website. Davis, welcome to the program.
Hi, thanks for having me.
We had Greg Palast on yesterday talking about this. I think it's worth revisiting. You guys are, you're on the ground in Kansas?
Yeah, I live in Topeka, Kansas. I could throw a stone and that would hit the State House here.
Okay. So tell us what happened in the primary election where Kris Kobach, the notorious voter purger, has been responsible or involved with, this effort largely financed and funded by right-wing billionaires, been responsible for purging probably millions, certainly hundreds of thousands of voters off the voting rolls in Wisconsin, Ohio, Michigan, Pennsylvania, states all over the country, and apparently in Kansas too. What happened in this primary where the Secretary of State, the guy in charge of the vote in Kansas, ran in the primary for governor?
Yeah, so it's worth mentioning that there's a lot of ways that we have voter suppression going on. The purging of voter rolls through Kansas Crosscheck, it's actually that national program. It started here in Kansas, and it used to be run in a way that was very cautious to not try to throw legitimate people off. But when Kris Kobach took over, he started using it in an incredibly irresponsible way that started purging potentially millions of people around the country. But we've also had this situation where we had documentary proof of citizenship here, where people would have to bring in their birth certificates to be able to vote. That finally got thrown out by a federal judge just this summer. So this was actually the first election in a long time in Kansas where tens of thousands of people were allowed to vote because they ruled that they had illegally been thrown off because they didn't submit their birth certificate. But the particular problem we had here, in addition to, we don't know how many people were purged, so there's plenty of people who showed up and found out they couldn't vote because they weren't registered. But we also had a problem where different counties were choosing to reject ballots for different reasons, such as in Johnson County, where they said that 153 people, their signatures didn't match on their ballot, and so they threw those out, where other counties didn't do that. We also
if I may interrupt, isn't it true that in Kansas there is no state requirement that the signatures match? It's simply a practice?
Yeah, so this is kind of interesting. This is a law, go figure, written by Kris Kobach, and what it does is whenever you first request a ballot, your signature does have to match. They verify that when you request to have a mail ballot, and at that point, if your signature doesn't match, they have time to try to contact you and say, we don't think your signature matches. Was this really you? And state law does say that. But whenever you get the ballot back, whenever you send in your ballot, state law just says it has to be signed. It doesn't say they're allowed to go through the verification process because they don't have time to try to cure it.
So they're applying a stricter standard to ballots coming from counties that might have voted against Kris Kobach? Is that what you're saying?
That's exactly what it appears to be. And so Kansas elections are run county by county, but for the biggest counties, the Secretary of State, Mr. Kobach, appoints the people in those counties who run elections. And it seems like places where Mr. Kobach was likely to pick up votes, they had a very relaxed standard on not rejecting anyone. But in counties like Johnson County, where Mr. Collier, the current governor, was obviously the favorite, there was a very, very strict standard where they threw out lots of votes. Was this a dictate that is documentable from Secretary of State Kobach's office to these election officials, or were they simply partisan election officials who were in the bag for Kobach and they knew what to do? So I can't exactly say, but these are political appointments, and Ronnie Metzger, the Johnson County election commissioner, in that county that should have gone more strongly for Collier, he actually was the head of the Republican Party of that county. He has deep ties to Kris Kobach. It's very questionable. And then also, because of the optics, Kris Kobach finally at the last minute recused himself from handling the primary, or he said he did, but now we know through the Kansas City Star did open records request, and Mr. Kobach was talking to Ronnie Metzger, the Johnson County election commissioner, into the AMs, I think at 1 and 3 a.m., while their system had allegedly crashed, and then we didn't get the election results till the next morning.
The system allegedly crashed? What's going on with this?
Yeah, so we had in Johnson County, which is the largest county in Kansas, we had new voting machines. There's it's a very dramatic situation in itself. But we had new voting machines, and they had a issue tabulating the results. And then I think it was around 3 a.m. they said they weren't going to be able to do it that night. And so they came back the next morning. And then at about 9 a.m. the next morning, they told us the results. There's lots of questions about these machines, how they're handled. They don't really give voters a clear chance to verify that their votes were accurately cast. So those are under a lot of scrutiny right now. And the software company is saying that it was just a software issue.
Right. Who makes these machines?
I think this is ES&S or ESS&S.
Yeah. Yeah. Remarkable. That company has a very strange history. The Yarosevich, I believe it's pronounced, brothers who started it, and their Christian fundamentalism and blah, blah, blah. I mean, it's just a whole bizarre thing. So how do you think this, two questions. How is this going to play out in Kansas? Is Kobach really in trouble, or is there just a bunch of people yelling about it, but nothing's going to happen, number one? And number two, to what extent, if we can demonstrate, and you believe that you have demonstrated that Kobach is actually rigging elections, rigged his own election, to what extent is that kind of a rigging of elections, kind of standard now in America? We see a number of Republican-controlled states with Republican secretaries of state where, particularly we saw this in the 2016 election, where the votes swung to Donald Trump, for example, and to Republicans in ways that were not necessarily anticipated by the pre-polling or even by the exit polls. To what extent is what we're seeing here now just this is the way we do it in America? Our election systems are no longer safe.
Well, I mean, I think that the legitimacy of an election has always been under question, and there's always tampering in elections. That's just a fact. It's usually people they want to point out one thing, right? They want to say that it was just cross-check. It was just these signature matches. But the reality is you steal an election by 1,000 paper cuts. You get a couple votes here, a dozen votes because something happened at this polling station. And the goal is to work to remove those issues, and that's why I was raising these objections. To try to make this as best as possible. But my objection hearing was yesterday, and to begin, they decided to have the chair of my hearing was Mr. Rucker, who is he's donated nearly $8,000 to Kris Kobach. 2 days ago, he was in a Kris Kobach for Governor T-shirt. He is Kris Kobach's subordinate, and he was the acting director of elections while Mr. Kobach recused himself. And while I made these whole points that it was a violation of due process, I couldn't get an impartial hearing if he was the chair or if he was on the panel, let alone the chair, and he refused to recuse himself. And then I made all my objections of how on various points, from unaffiliated voters to signature matching, state laws had been broken, U.S. constitutional precedent had been broken, and instead they heard out my objections. And then they tried to challenge my standing. They tried to kick out my case. And when they legally couldn't do that, they just, without any reasoning, they just ruled that all of my objections were denied.
Wow. Incredible. So is this dead in the water now?
So for this process, it is, 3 Republican operatives who somehow, it's a really awful process currently how we do this. But the only way to go forward now would be to bring a lawsuit, which I am contemplating. I'm just bringing this as a citizen, and I thought these issues had to be brought to light. I'm not positive if I'm going to bring a lawsuit yet or not, but I did see last night on the news already election officials are saying that, well, they don't think that what I brought up would have changed the outcome of the election. They do think that I brought up legitimate concerns that need to be addressed. So if nothing else, there's public awareness on these issues, and I'm considering a lawsuit right now. Wow.
Well, keep us up to date, would you, Davis?
Yeah, thanks for having me.
That's Davis Hammet. He is an activist and founder of Loud Light. Loudlight.org is the website, an election integrity group in Kansas. Loud_light is the Twitter handle. And as I said, loudlight.org is the website. Davis, great work you're doing, and I look forward to talking with you in the future.